What's up, everybody? My name is Matt and welcome back to the channel. And in today's video, I'm going to be showing you guys an NFT strategy that I don't see a lot of people using. And I tell you, I feel like this is probably one of the least risky strategies you guys can use and ultimately one of the most profitable. So if you guys are new, make sure to drop a like, subscribe, and let's get right into it. So the idea behind my strategy that I wanted to show you guys is, again, this really isn't common. I don't see this being talked a lot, and I feel like this is a very good idea if you're someone who doesn't want to spend a boatload of money on a bunch of different NFTs. So what are we looking for? Well, there are a few different factors I'm going to be going over in this video. The first factor is supply. We want to find projects that have a very low supply, or at least a supply that we could relatively have some control over. Now, obviously, you're never going to be able to have a major impact in the overall price. No one just has really that much money unless you're like a millionaire, but overall, we want to find projects that have a low enough supply where we could own a nice piece of the pie, even if that's half of 1% or 1/10 of 1%. That is definitely better than 1,000th of 1% of the supply. Now, aside from supply, we want to overall lower our cost basis. We want to find ways in which we can invest in a bunch of different projects without shelling out a lot of money. So instead of me babbling on, let's get into some examples. So the first example is something that I made a very clean 10x on. This is something called Fluffy Fox Society. Now, I first saw these guys at 0.1 and purchased 3 of them. Now, that is 0.3 Solana, or equivalent roughly to around 30, 40, 50 bucks. That's not an awful lot of money to take a chance on some NFT. Well, why did I decide to do that, and how did it very easily 10x from there? Well, one thing I noticed was that there was generally a low amount listed on Magic Eden. There's only 70 right now, and at the time I bought, it was still pretty similar, and I said, man, that's kind of a low amount for a project that has a supply of under 1,000. So I said, hey man, that's a little weird. Maybe this might have some potential. Maybe a lot of people who minted are actually holding on to them. Then I noticed again that the floor was so extremely low relative to the supply. Ideally, the more supply there is, the lower the floor is going to be. That rule doesn't always work, and that definitely has a lot of exceptions, but ultimately it's a nice principle to go by. The final thing I did was I checked their social media. Hey guys, I mean, their Twitter looks all right. They got over 2,000 followers. I just felt like there was a disconnect between the amount of progress they had made on Twitter, Discord, etc., and the actual floor price, which at the time was extremely, extremely cheap. So that is what we're looking for. If I could sum up this video in one word, that would be disconnect. We want to find a disconnect between the actual floor price and the progress they have made on social media, the amount of supply. There is so much that we can do to try to find these disconnects and purchase projects that are showing them. But before I go any further, guys, make sure to check out my Patreon down below in the description. On my Patreon, I let everybody know about the Fluffy Foxes, and people have been thanking me ever since for finding projects like that. Now, of course, not every project I find is going to win, but if you guys want to see exactly what I am investing in and when, check out the Patreon down below. Of course, you guys get full access to Matt's NFT Dojo, behind-the-scenes content, exclusive Discord access, and so much more. Personally, I think it's a steal for only $10 a month. Now, the next thing we have to factor in is the actual ecosystem we are using. Now, I like Solana for this because ultimately there is extremely little you will actually be paying in terms of fees and transaction costs, etc. Now, if you had thousands of dollars, which most people watching this video, including myself, don't have to spend, if you had thousands and thousands of dollars laying around, you could probably do this on Ethereum. There's ultimately nothing wrong with that, but the gas fees would just eat you up. And I find that you would ultimately probably take more losses than you would in gains. Again, it's not impossible. It's not unheard of. Sure, it could be done, but you'd have to be willing to risk a lot in terms of gas money. Now, of course, we want to make this as little in risk as possible. So I think the best thing you guys could do is, again, to go on to either Magic Eden or some Solana platform and look for projects that, again, have that disconnect. Now, another example that sort of breaks the rule is Fractals. Now, I noticed these guys when they had a floor price of 0.09 and snagged a few. And after that, they went up, again, 10x to a floor price of 1. Now, I've sold a little bit. I'm still holding on to most of them, but even now, I'm still sitting with a 5x. So how did I find these guys? Well, ultimately, I looked at them and said, man, 100,000, that's a huge supply, but there was very little listed. 249 out of 100,000? That's nothing. When we take a look at any large collection, let's say we want to look at even like Soul Punks or something like that. You know, Soul Punks, if we wanted to look at a collection like that, we could check even from, I mean, we could pick any collection we want to. But ultimately, let's say even something like Thugbirds, this is a relatively good ratio, but there are some projects on here that ultimately don't have a great ratio. We want to look at Galactic Geckos, for example, 629. That's a little higher out of 10,000. There are a lot of different collections we could check on here, and ultimately, we could tell very, very easily whether or not they have a good ratio. Same thing, 650 out of 5,000. That's kind of a lot. We could pick any project on here. Now, ultimately, what really drew me to something like Fractals was that, again, out of 100,000, there was only 200 something that were listed on the platform. So I ignored the fact that it had this ultra large supply and focused in on the fact that it had an enormously low amount actually listed. Then I checked their website, their Twitter. I said, wait a minute, man, these guys have like an actual use case. They actually have things going on for them, and it's just been history ever since. Gary Vee has gotten into them, and I think that overall, they will become valuable over time. So again, we are continuing to follow the strategy that we are making our costs as low as possible by using Solana. We are finding a project that once again has that disconnect. I saw this, I said, wait a minute, man, why are so little listed relative to the total supply? Why is their website so freaking good and selling for this cheap? It just didn't make sense to me. And ultimately, that's what I think you guys should do, because you could go onto Magic Eden and really you could spend 2, 3, 4 Solana and dip your toes into a ton of different projects that you might have not normally done if you would have used, say, Ethereum and bought one really expensive one. Now, here is just another example, Cow Empire. This is something I mentioned in a recent video, but ultimately, with something like this, there's only 999 of them. So I sat here and bought 5 of them earlier, like that. And ultimately, that's not a lot of money. That's around $100. And I feel like that might be worth the risk in the long run that, for whatever reason, a bunch of random Solana whales may tweet about this on Twitter. Now, it's not likely going to happen. I have no idea really if this is a great project, but I feel like if you are trying to make money flipping, you have a better chance taking a few Solana and throwing it into like 5 or 10 projects like this and getting a 10x than just buying an already overpriced NFT and hoping that it gets a little bit more overpriced. It just doesn't really make sense. So if you're looking for guaranteed flips, obviously you'll never find them, but the best thing I think you could do is to take a very low amount of money, succumb to a very low amount of fees, and ultimately dip your feet in the water with as many NFTs as possible, because it can be done. In theory, it would be a lot easier to get 999 NFT investors to buy these up than it would be to get 100,000 or 50,000 or 10,000 of some other projects. And again, there are exceptions to the rule. Fractals are an exception to the rule. And of course, there are a lot of projects like Cow Empire that might go nowhere, that have a very low supply. But ultimately, I think for the relative price of some of these projects, it just might be worth it. So with that being said, everybody, thank you guys so much for watching. Make sure to drop a like and subscribe if you all are new. Again, check out the Patreon down below in the description if you guys would like to know exactly what NFTs I am buying and selling, access to my watch list, and so much more. All of that is linked down below. I truly do hope you guys have enjoyed this strategy and found it useful. Make sure to drop a like, and I'll see you all in the next video. Peace.